Surprise! A stroke of a pen over dinner at Versailles, preempting plans for a big Friday signing in Switzerland of an interim agreement between the United States and Iran, one that would run for 60 days. Coming off the G7 in France, we'll ask why Donald Trump suddenly decided to get it over with, and whether the region and the world can now breathe a sigh of relief. Oil markets certainly believe they're again down as the Strait of Hormuz gets set to reopen. But it's only a 60-day Memorandum of Understanding. And while Gulf neighbors will cheer the lifting of the blockade on what remains the world's biggest maritime choke point for oil and gas, we'll take a second look at that agreement brokered by Pakistan and Qatar, most notably including in the deal a cessation of fighting in Lebanon. What happens if Israel or Hezbollah don't like the way negotiations unfold? Would Washington and Tehran be able to rein them in? How does the U.S. president's plan compare with the 2015 UN nuclear agreement that he constantly belittles? Are we headed for closure or a whole new level of uncertainty? Today in the France 24 debate, we're talking about Trump's surprise signing. With us, Mark Burley. He's a former Tehran deputy bureau chief for the French news agency AFP. Good to see you.
Nice to be back.
With us as well, Rina Bassist, editor for Al Monitor. How are things?
Good evening, Francois. Nice to be here.
Okay, and with us as well, Humayun Falakshai, head of crude oil analysis at Trade Analysts and Consultants, Kepler. Welcome back.
Thanks, man.
A reminder, you can always listen to the France 24 debate. That's right, listen, wherever podcasts are streamed. So it's shortly after 11 p.m. Dinner had not yet even started at the same Palace of Versailles that hosted the treaty that ended World War I back in 1919. According to French newspaper Le Parisien, Marco Rubio then asked his French counterpart to find a printer. That's quite the challenge at that hour in the outsized 17th century palace. Still, France's finance minister had front row seats for what unfolded next.
We literally saw Marco Rubio leave. I don't know if he had already printed the MOU, the memorandum, or went to print it, and come back. We cleared the plates, and the President of the United States... I think President Trump had informed him just before, since they arrived together. But in any case, for us, ministers of the French government, it was a surprise.
Mark Burley, in that same interview, Roland Lescure saying he was sitting next to Scott Bessent, his U.S. counterpart, and to Howard Lutnick. They didn't have any idea by the looks of it. What happened?
I think you can characterize pretty much what's happened over the last 3.5 months as a seat of your pants flying, and I think that's what we saw last night. It's, when you've got a president of the United States who runs on instinct and who's known to be fairly volatile but loves the limelight, I think decisions are made in moments, in minutes, without maybe everybody being informed what's going on.
Yeah, because we've had several iterations of this Memorandum of Understanding. First, we had the news begin to surface last weekend. Then the big announcement on Sunday that they'd reached a deal. Then talk about kind of this DocuSign kind of electronic signing by both sides that did or did not yet happen. Then it was going to be in Geneva. No, it was going to be on Lake Lucerne. And then this. Rina Bassist, what do you make of it?
Well, first of all, yes, there was this lapse of time, and it started on Sunday, and evidently parts of this 14-point agreement started to be leaked. So we find ourselves with all sorts of newspapers publishing all sorts of versions of this final document. So I think even President Trump at some point understood there was some sort of an urgency to present to the world the real version, the American version, if you want, with this very quickly organized signing ceremony. And of course, there is also the question of the personality. I mean, it was expected to be Vice President J.D. Vance that is going to Switzerland. First, they spoke about Geneva, then Lucerne, to sign the deal. And we can imagine that Trump, at a certain point, he arrives at Versailles with all the glory, all the historical references of this place, all the treaties that have been signed. And he says to himself, okay, why not? Let's do it here. I will sign it. Let the whole world see, because the whole world was already there. All the journalists were there at the preparing for this meeting that was also prepared at the very last minute. We had a notice from the Elysee just a week before that this dinner was going to take place. This is absolutely Trump.
All right, so you've just heard two different possible theories as to why he did this. Theory one, impressed by the grandeur and the history of the surroundings, being in the Palace of Versailles, and thinks, I want to do a Versailles myself. Option two, which is, we're starting to get a bit of criticism, I better get ahead of the noise.
Actually, I think the details of the agreement were published at least online a few hours before Trump was in Versailles. So I think that was already done. I would second.
We heard some kind of not hostile, but some tough questioning on the part of U.S. journalists at his closing press conference Wednesday in Evian, journalists from pro-Trump media.
Of course, I mean, you look at the terms of the deal, I guess it's completely normal. And I would say if I were a Trump supporter, I would not be very happy with the terms of the deal. I don't see which point where the U.S. has had the upper hand, at least in what's written down there. And I would say it's interesting to see that symbolic being signed, in Versailles. I kind of agree. I think maybe he saw the grandeur of the palace and thought, I want to be on that picture and would be remembered for a long time afterwards. But I would say maybe the symbolic is going to repeat itself as well. We all know how the first Treaty of Versailles ended, and so I think this parallel is easy to make, but it has a high likelihood of happening, I would say.
The Versailles, which was a peace treaty, and the backlash ended with the Second World War. So Versailles 1, Switzerland 0 when it comes to signings. The 60-day clock has started, according to U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. 14 points now that are out in the open. In the document, things like sorting out Lebanon and a path to lifting sanctions. Absent from the document, any mention of ballistic missiles, for instance. Camille Knight has more.
It's a Memorandum of Understanding, or gentleman's agreement, according to US officials, that includes 14 commitments over 60 days and the tools for Iran to rebuild its economy. Starting with the US waiving sanctions and agreeing to let Iran sell its oil that could bring in $60 to $70 billion a year. It could also unfreeze more than $100 billion worth of Iran's funds currently locked up in banks around the world.
We have taken a lot of their money, and we have their money. We have taken their money. It's not our money. It's their money, and we froze it. At a certain point in time, I guess we're going to have to give it back.
The commitment that's possibly raised most eyebrows, a $300 billion investment fund to help the country rebuild. This far exceeds what was given to Iran in the past, and though it's unclear who would be footing the bill, the Trump administration has suggested it would come from Gulf states, who aren't expected to willingly contribute after months of unprovoked attacks. What Donald Trump says he has achieved in return is securing the safe passage of commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz with no charge. But that commitment only lasts 60 days, which means there could be new fees in the future.
When the strait is to be controlled, it needs to be managed. That means we have responsibility and sovereignty over it. Naturally, there are services there. And in return, there's a fee.
Iran has pledged it would not procure or develop nuclear weapons, but the language isn't as strong as it was in the 2015 agreement that Trump torpedoed, and details will need to be ironed out in the next 60 days. Iran's ballistic missile program and its support for regional proxies, meanwhile, were both kept off the table, leaving its arsenal untouched and armed groups like Hezbollah emboldened. Despite saying regime change was a priority at the start of the war, the US is now committed to not interfering in internal affairs, meaning there's no guarantee the money will benefit the Iranian people.
Yeah, so as Kemi says, lots in there to talk about. Nukes, the who pays for reconstruction, the issue of how free and open the Strait of Hormuz is. But let's begin with that last point. While some of the more than 1 million displaced in Lebanon are returning home, the guns have not gone completely silent. Lebanese state media report 3 killed in Israeli drone attacks near neighboring villages in the south. Israel's military announced the death on Wednesday night of one of its soldiers in southern Lebanon. Israel, whose military has published a map showing an expanded zone of control for its troops in the south of Lebanon. This, as officials told Reuters, that it was holding talks with the U.S. over continuing its deployment. Is that map that we just saw there, Rina Bassis, a bargaining ploy on the part of the Israelis with Washington, or are they serious? They're not going to be moved?
No, I think they are serious, but there is still some space for maneuvering because the military said it is not, we have not decided yet, or it has not been decided yet, whether in all these positions, military positions that we have taken or established in this area, we will really stay physically or we will do back and forth operations. And going back and forth, it means that the military would withdraw a bit, but we don't know where. So this is something that is still being discussed between Jerusalem and Washington, but I don't think the map itself it's not a way of putting the pressure on Washington. It's more showing to the Israelis that the government and the military are serious, that they are not just going to pull back, not knowing if the Lebanese army is going to take their place. That would not happen. There would have to be some sort of a beginning of a process where the Lebanese military comes into these areas and acts against Hezbollah people. Only then the Israeli military could withdraw. So this is not a process that will happen overnight.
Lebanon's president wants those negotiations that Washington's been brokering directly with Israel to continue on to the next round. Does Israel want to negotiate with the Lebanese state?
That's a good question, because on the one hand, we know that the extreme right forces within the government of Mr. Netanyahu, they don't want to negotiate. They don't want a deal. They want Tzahal, the Israeli military, to continue until Hezbollah is annihilated. But all the commanders of the military are saying it's not possible. We cannot annihilate Hezbollah. For that, we have to overtake all of Lebanon, and this is not on the agenda. So there is a big disagreement between the far right and the military echelon, and of course the opposition also in Israel. The opposition is saying, listen, we can't just obey the Americans and just withdraw. That's not possible. We have to hit Hezbollah harder. So we can say that Prime Minister Netanyahu is sort of caught in between all of these forces that are drawing him in different directions. And, of course, in front of him, he has President Trump, who is saying, listen, you have to reach an agreement with the Lebanese government. You have to cease fire. And the problem of Israel is that for Israel, a ceasefire won't be enough. It won't be enough. It won't reassure the Israelis, especially not the Israelis living in the north. They have to see that Hezbollah is being disarmed, and these are two objectives that are very far apart.
Heading into a general election on top of it. Mark Burley, let me ask you, because we heard from the U.S. Vice President speaking to reporters at the White House earlier, a more polite iteration of kind of the hot and cold talk of Donald Trump when he talks about the Israeli prime minister, like we heard at that closing press conference at the G7 on Wednesday. Should we pay attention to that? Do Donald Trump's words sort of chastising Benjamin Netanyahu? Is that just talk?
I think J.D. Vance, just a few minutes ago, was actually very, very sharp with Israel. In fact, he was telling them basically to pull their head in, that we are the only ally that matters and perhaps the only ally that you've got left in the world, so you should fall into line. I'm not really... What I'm seeing with Lebanon, with Iran, with the US, is that each of them are trying to sell this deal, and Israel not even being party of the deal, is trying to sell it to their own public, their own domestic audience, and trying to show that there is strategic victory along the way. Now, for Netanyahu, obviously, that's showing a buffer zone deep into Lebanon. But at the same time, how does this square with, the point one of the MOU, where you're talking about territorial integrity of Lebanon has to be respected? It's very tough, but Netanyahu can put up a good domestic selling argument to his people with a map like this, he's a great communicator, he does it all. But the practical terms, and we're starting to see a lot of practical strings come through that could foul up this MOU, is that he relies on American weapons. He needs American weapons now. He needs the maintenance. He needs missiles. He needs American weapons. And Trump could be the guy, unlike Congress or something else, who just sort of says, you don't do what I do, I will cut off the one thing that matters to you. Because Trump always hones in on the weak spot.
Okay, you bring us to an essential question. Humayun Falak-Shashi, the rest of the world thinks, and Mark just talked about it, that all the U.S. has to do is lift a finger and Israel pulls back to its borders and that's it, it's over. Same as the rest of the world thinks that all Tehran has to do is pick up the phone and Hezbollah's missiles go quiet. Is that true?
On the Tehran is Hezbollah line? Definitely. Yes, I think so.
Hezbollah will, if Tehran says stop it, they stop it.
Absolutely, yeah. But I don't see why they would stop. I think Tehran actually may use that card, knowing that there is a rift, at least openly, officially, between Israel and the US. They could use the Hezbollah card, ask them to launch a few rockets. Of course, Israel is going to retaliate. And Tehran is going to say to the US, look, Israel is bombing our deal. You have to make something about it.
Should Lebanon have been among the 14 points? In that, should it have been in the document?
I think it doesn't matter because whether it is in the document or not, Israel is going to do its own thing. And it's probably, if you were in the shoes of the Israeli government, everyone would have done the same. Israel territorial integrity and security is adamant to the government and to the people of Israel. So they're going to defend the country. So if there's rockets being launched towards Israel, they're going to retaliate. But what I'm saying is I think Iran actually may use that card to get even more concessions from the U.S. in that 60-day window period. I think it's very likely that we see ups and downs in the transit through the Strait of Hormuz simply because of that, simply because of the Israel-Lebanon potential skirmishes that we're going to see in the next few weeks. And that, I think, means that it's really one of the key elements of this MOU.
So if we see skirmishes in South Lebanon, for instance, Rina Bassis, do you agree that will be Tehran's way of messaging?
Yes, and I think, it's obvious why the Iranians are insisting on Lebanon. Two reasons. First of all, Hezbollah has been very weakened over the past 2 years or 3 years with the Beeper attack and Hassan Nasrallah that was killed. So it became very weak. But suddenly, over the past few weeks, this terror organization has managed to find a way to get stronger and to hit Israel quite strongly with this technology of the optic fiber drones that is efficient in killing Israeli soldiers and civilians. So suddenly they have a card that is working. So of course they want to reinforce Hezbollah. That's one argument. And then the other argument is that of course they can take out this card whenever they want. Whenever they want, they can tell Hezbollah, the negotiations are not going so well. We need some more pressure on the Americans. Do your thing against Israel.
So wait a minute. So Hezbollah's just a proxy of Iran, and is Israel just a proxy of the United States at this point, the way Mark was saying?
No. I'm not saying that. I think Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran. I don't think Israel is politically a proxy of the U.S.
I agree completely with Mark because, and we have seen that. President Trump has put red lines for Israel not to bomb Beirut. Israel bombed Beirut 3 times despite this red line. So we cannot call Israel a proxy of the U.S., despite, of course, all of the dependence that Mark described before, diplomatically, security-wise, financially. Israel needs the United States, and J.D. Vance, he was not, maybe he spoke very aggressively in a way, but he was right when he was saying that this is Israel's greatest ally, and Israel needs the U.S. Israel cannot do without the U.S. But on the other hand, evidently, Benjamin Netanyahu has a lot of political pressure from within. He has cities and villages in the north of Israel that are empty, that have become phantom villages because people are evacuating by themselves. The government decided not to evacuate people, and people are running away. This is an impossible situation for him. We have spoken about this buffer zone, but the real frontier of Israel is not in Lebanese territory. It's inside Israel, because there are areas that are becoming empty. This is something that Mr. Netanyahu, he cannot arrive like that to the upcoming elections.
All right, and a few other points then. The accord, it calls for $300 billion to finance Iran's recovery. One day after the U.S. president rubbed elbows with the leader of the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed bin Zayed, and the Emir of Qatar at the G7 summit. The question is, I'll put it to you, Humayun, who pays this $300 billion?
No one knows, really. I think you had the Saudi foreign minister today or yesterday. He said, we're not ready to be putting any money into that fund. We need a lot more security assurances before we envisage just the idea of doing that. This is a point where it's been extremely vague in the MOU.
Because I've heard analysts say that Gulf states may be tempted to think, we paid protection money to the United States, look where it got us, let's just pay the Iranians to leave us alone.
Yeah, to an extent that would make sense, but I think it's obviously a lot more complex than that. If you pay money to the Iranians, you don't know, maybe they're going to use that and build more missiles so that they can hit back on these countries too. So I think it's so far it's one of the points which is the most vague of the accord. And I expect it to remain very vague until the very end.
You should remember, of course, that the Revolutionary Guards control at least a third of the economy in Iran. Money going in is going to be plugged into the Revolutionary Guards one way or another. But when you talk about countries, you're not talking about $300 billion into our pocket, like that's a wonderful credit card. I mean, money is very fungible at that level. We could be talking about an IMF loan. The U.S. has a lot of sway of the IMF. It can do something there, but you can talk about there's going to be a big period of rearmament on all sides here. And part of this is, the Gulf states are very reliant on American weapons, and these involve money, but they can also involve big discounts, and that discount can also go to this fund. So when you're talking about countries and money, it's not cash sitting in a bank. There are ways and means of reaching goals or making it look like you're reaching goals. It's not all.
I would just add also one point is the fact that if this were to happen, you'd need a lot of the actual primary sanctions from the U.S. to be removed. The president cannot do it.
Has to go through Congress.
He needs to Congress as well, so it makes it less likely.
Yeah, there seems to be in this document promises that are made that don't rely on Donald Trump, but on the U.S. Congress.
That and first of all, the sanctions, it's not just American sanctions.
UN sanctions.
All of these to happen, yes, there are European sanctions, and a lot of the Iranian money, it's distributed in plenty of countries that are not necessarily the U.S. So you would need a big part of the international community participating. And then on the 300 million, don't forget, there were a lot of promises by Gulf states to contribute to the rehabilitation of Gaza. For the moment, we didn't see a dime. There were a lot of talks.
Syria as well.
Of course, Syria. And then Lebanon. I mean, before the war, there was this conference that was planned by Paris to support the Lebanese military, a donors conference that was pushed several times before the war. And why was it pushed each time? Because the Saudis said there are no guarantees. We are not putting all this money on the table. So here, I don't see the Gulf states taking out their checkbook so easily. And if the president thinks that he can get $300 million from business people, in a way, why not? Of course, a big part of Iran is devastated, and there might be, it's terrible to say, but opportunities to rebuild. But it's not going to be so easy to get all of this money together. Maybe just promises, and then we'll see what happens with the real money.
All right, some people, again, they believe that peace is at hand. The price of oil certainly falling this Thursday. Brent crude back from highs of $118 a barrel in late April to $75 this Thursday, dropping again. How many ships can now, to borrow Donald Trump's words, start their engines, though? These images filmed just a couple of days ago by our correspondent Reza Sigh off Hormuz Island earlier this week. So this is your remit, Humayun. Tell us how it's going on that front. We heard the U.S. Vice President gushing that the tankers are starting to go through again. Is that true?
We're seeing a bit more passage, but it's still very low compared to normal levels. But we're starting to see some passage. We've seen today 3 Saudi tankers pass through the strait. That's roughly equivalent to 6 million barrels of oil. And the interesting point, though, is that they have done so with their signal, the AIS signal off. So the AIS signal is very much the signal that the vessel emits, and they have done it with their signal off. Passing through the strait, they've only put it back when they were actually out of the Persian Gulf. So it does show that, despite the deal being signed yesterday and being official now, there is not yet a huge sense of security. And also they have taken what we call the Omani route. historically, before the war, you had the traditional route is the IMO route between the two countries.
Right.
And during the war, most of the vessels exiting took the Iranian route, so going more north of the Strait of Hormuz. But these 3 vessels, they have exited taking the Omani route and not the normal IMO route. So we're still quite far from a pure, full normalization of flows. It seems that it is going to happen, but it is going to take time because you need confidence building in the shipping industry.
Confidence building. Mark Burley, you heard that clip in that report we played earlier of the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament saying, down the road, we're going to charge people to go through. It's is that just bargaining at the outset of these 60 days, or is there a precedent that's been set?
I think from the American point of view, when you're doing this, they're trying to put facts on the ground. They're trying to create a pattern of behavior that would be more difficult to break in the future. So 60 days, they're hoping that, well, first of all, mine clearance, and then they can start using Omani waters as long as Oman doesn't buy into this Persian Gulf Strait body that the Iranians have set up. So, they're hoping that over the 60 days, it will become the standard practice that you do not pay, you don't have to pay, and you go through. Galibaf, he's interesting. I interviewed him back in 2012. At the moment, I will chalk this up to selling domestically. The 2 things, I think the 2 top things that the Iranian regime are interested in are the nuclear dossier, of course, but now...
Which we'll turn to in a moment.
Now it's proved that the Strait of Hormuz is a weapon at least as strong as an atomic bomb for them. They can hold... they can put a boot on the throat of the world economy, and it's just there, and even the biggest military in the world couldn't do that much about it. So I think part of it is selling, but part of it is also laying down a strategic direction that one way or another they will want to pursue. If the MOU breaks apart, I think we can see mines pretty quickly in the Omani waters.
Rina Bassist?
Wait, no, I agree completely with Mark, and I would even say that the Strait of Hormuz are a more powerful weapon than the nuclear project, because since President Trump went out of the JCPOA deal in 2018, I mean, okay, the Europeans were unhappy about it, but they didn't do anything aggressively to force Iran to stop the nuclear plan. The Iranians just continued the way they wanted to continue. Now the Strait of Hormuz is something else, and suddenly we see all the great powers and all the international community, everybody forgetting completely of what happened in Iran end of January, all the people that were killed, the misery that the Iranian people are suffering. Everything is forgotten. Nothing is important. The only important thing is the global economy, the petrol that must continue flowing, and the opening of the Strait of Hormuz.
So do you take
they found a fantastic mean of restoring their regional hegemony.
Do you take objection to the final statement at the G7, which backed this process, this interim agreement process that's been launched?
I think that many in Iran, they must take it with a lot of difficulties, with a lot of sorrow, feeling being completely abandoned, because now we start really talking about how a final agreement would look like, and a final agreement would strengthen the regime in Tehran. There is no other way of seeing it. I mean, they would have, to a certain point, we don't know exactly, but to a certain point, they will keep this, the control over the Strait of Hormuz. They will get their money back little by little, but they will receive it. They will get the sanctions lifted. And we know very well that all the money that will start flowing into Iran, it will not go to better the lives of the Iranian people. It would go to the pockets of the Revolutionary Guards and all their associates. So for the Iranian people, it's not good news.
Humayun Falakshashi, there's a statement that's come out that's attributed to the new supreme leader, who's not been seen in public since February the 28th. Some wondering if he's even alive or compos mentis. And I'll just read you one of the lines from it. It says, "It was the American president who, out of desperation, used all kinds of leverage to bring the Memorandum of Understanding about." Domestically in Iran, how are people taking this?
First of all, I completely agree with what Rina said on the Iranian people being, feeling abandoned here. But on this point specifically, and this goes back to what Ghalibaf was saying on Iranian state TV, I think this is for domestic audience, because despite the fact that this agreement looks unequal and it looks like it's really in favor of the Iranian regime, some hardline regime supporters are actually not happy about this, and they're being very vocal. The fact that this is being a mistake, that we're being deceived again by the U.S. At the end, they will hit us back, and so all this is for domestic audience purposes.
So this brings us back to a point that was made during Monday's show, where we had a guest telling us how, just as with the day the fighting stops, Israel's prime minister is called to account over what happened on October 7th in Gaza. The day the fighting starts, the attention in Iran turns back to the high inflation, to the crackdown at the start of the year against those protests.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, there is a sense, to which you could think the war, just with bombing, wouldn't have anyway led to regime change. So maybe we can do a kind of agreement and let the hardliners, kill themselves, if I may, like cut their own throats. It could be one of the strategies from the U.S. Who knows? But just on the Strait of Hormuz, I would add that this is a weapon. It's true that it's a weapon more, powerful than a nuclear bomb, it seems. But I think it's a weapon that they cannot use for very long. And this is because other countries in the region, obviously, what they're going to prioritize in the next few months is building alternatives to this strait. So you cannot build alternatives for every kind of product. But for crude oil, it's relatively easy to do so. And I think in 12 months, we'll be in a situation where actually these countries in the region will depend a lot less on the Strait of Hormuz. So this is a weapon that has been used very efficiently this time. But if there is another, war in 1 year or 2 years, it won't be the same.
All right. The document, by the way, speaks of lifting international sanctions, dealing with enriched uranium with, quote, blending on site under the supervision of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the dilution of enriched uranium clause, putting the UN nuclear watchdog back in the game.
The fact that the indispensable role of the IAEA is recognized is a sound point of departure. And now it's for us to sit down with our American colleagues, our Iranian colleagues, and start formulating the concrete steps that will have to be taken. So I think it's good that the memorandum is there. And now the technical work starts.
Technical work starts, Mark Burley. We're know
butting up against this all the way through the MOU.
I mean, you covered the agreement that was signed in Vienna back in 2015. Boy, was that technical. It was that
2 years of effort. I mean, going into details, the Iranians totally into process and pulling things, down to commas. And
so what's your big takeaway from that clip? Is it the UN is back in the game after Donald Trump's disparaged it so much, or the fact that this 60 days is a very short period of time?
I think the IAEA is the only body that, if it can be pulled in, is the only body that can, has the expertise and basically, to a degree, the trust to oversee something like that. But, you can't avoid the fact that even before the war, Iran was frustrating the IAEA on determining how much of the enriched uranium was left over after the the war back in June last year, if we remember that one. The IAEA hasn't been able to, define what is left, where it is, and in what state going on. So, it's only as it needs some muscle to be able to push through that door. The IAEA has the expertise, but it doesn't necessarily have the muscle unless it comes through. The memorandum. The Americans have been saying when they briefed on this points 7 and 8, the sanctions and the nuclear talks. This MOU just opens 60 days of talks on the nuclear thing, but they also said the sanctions are in parallel with that. For them, there needs to be progress for sanctions to be lifted. This is the American interpretation of what's written. It's not written explicitly like that, but the Americans say the language was almost identical in those 2 points because in their mind, and that's always the problem, in their mind they are going to be looking at progress on the nuclear file from the Iranian point of view, progress on lifting sanctions. We'll have to see how that works out. We're looking at a 60-day window. We cannot forget that basically another 60 days after that are the midterm elections. I mean, I can see a scenario in which, for some of the parties in this MOU, it's a 60-day window could be extended and it takes you up to whatever happens in the midterms. You've suddenly got a very different President of the United States in November in terms of the powers and in terms of
some of us with gray hair are old enough to remember 1979 when the hostage crisis, the Iranians waited until the elections had passed. They even waited till the inauguration day to release the hostages. Do you see them sort of...
They're very aware of the American calendar. I mean, part of the thing when I said that I interviewed Kalibov, the interview itself was kind of boring, I got to say. But afterwards, I had his aides, his political aides around me. Educated Miami University, all of them. They were brilliant. They were talking about how does he come across. They were talking like American political pundits in flawless American, by the way, the Iranians. They're very aware of the American calendar. They're very aware of the pressure that can be brought to bear. If there is a weakness in the MOU or if there is something to exploit before the midterms, they'll do it. Yes, they will look at doing that. If there is an advantage to them to kick the can down the road till after the midterms, then they will do that too. They're very aware and they're very process oriented. They're excellent in terms of negotiating process.
That's the question, because it's not in their interest. You just heard Humayun earlier saying to be in a permanent state of conflict if then they lose their leverage afterwards. So what will they do? Will they want to scuttle this deal, Tehran, or will they want to do business with Donald Trump than with someone else?
No, I think they want to do business, but already we see that they are starting the negotiations from a very good starting point from their point of view. Because if you remember, after when the war started, February 28, the American administration was saying, we are not talking about diluting. This is not on the table. We are talking about taking out by force, if needed, all these 450, 60% enriched uranium.
And now it's on the table.
We are not talking about that anymore. We are talking about the Iranian proposal, about the Iranian suggestion, about what the Iranians want. Because, of course, if the uranium stays there, it's reversible. We can always bring it back. So that's one thing.
So that's a big concession.
That's a big...
And there's the fact that ballistic missiles, which were in the 2015 UN deal, are not mentioned here.
They are not mentioned. The proxies are not mentioned. There is no clause in this 14-point document that are saying that the money that will be restored to Iran cannot go to Hezbollah, cannot go to the Houthis. Nothing is saying that in the agreement. So they're starting very nicely from their point of view, very comfortably. And we don't know how this is end. As Mark said, it could take 60 days. It could take 120 days. It could take even a year. The Iranians are experts in taking their time, and we have seen that with Obama.
Is it in Iran's interest to go slow or go fast?
To go slow, of course. I think they know that even though it hasn't been a success at all, this intervention, they know that it's unlikely that another U.S. president takes such a risk. So I think if they go slow enough to, let's say, outlive the Trump presidency, they will do it. I would say that in the short term, for the Trump administration, there are also considerations to do this in the short term. You have the events like the World Cup, the 4th of July upcoming, but you also have summer driving season. This is when the Americans take their car and drive, and this is when they're going to fill up their cars many times this summer. So this time at this time of the year, in regards to the midterms in 4 months, you need to have relatively low prices, and we're already seeing average gasoline prices in the U.S. come under $4 per gallon. So this is also to take into account. But I guess what has been said so far, I completely agree. I think it's very unlikely that in 60 days we'll reach an end point there, and it's very, very likely that it gets extended.
All right, finally, if our panel had to drink a shot every time Donald Trump on Wednesday disparaged Barack Obama and that 2015 nuclear deal that he signed, well, I won't go there. But very far from Evian and Versailles, the 44th President of the United States in Chicago this Thursday for the opening of his presidential museum. At the dedication, we'll see Joe Biden, we'll see George W. Bush, we'll see Bill Clinton. Absent, of course, will be Trump, who, in the company of his Egyptian counterpart on Wednesday, falsely mixed the 2016 unfreezing of Iranian assets held by the U.S. since the Islamic Revolution with what he calls a bribe.
He tried to bribe his way out. I didn't do that. Nobody mentions that. $1.7 billion and hundreds of millions of dollars. They tried to bribe their way out of it. And you know what the Iranians did? They laughed at Obama and they said he's a stupid son of a bitch. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Rina Bassis, that's really harsh language. Sometimes we think that world events happen because of great power and national interests. Is it just personal enmity to explain all of this?
Well, there is a very personal aspect to it for President Trump because of the criticism over this agreement and over the war. And many people in the U.S., including some people within his own party, are saying, but really, does this 14-point agreement, is it better than the JCPOA, the agreement that was signed in 2015? You promised that it would be much better, that it would be stricter, that it would bring the Iranians down on their knees. And looking at the agreement, it's not happening. So he has to defend himself. He has to defend his own heritage. We know that heritage for him is very important. He's the one who is longing for the Nobel Peace Prize. He's the one longing to be remembered as the one who brought peace to the Middle East. So he wants to show the Americans, I'm doing so much better than President Obama.
Obama, who's, again, these are live images, dedicating that presidential center library, if you will, in Chicago. Rina Bassis, many thanks. I want to thank Mark Burley, Humayun Falak Shahi. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.